Hi everybody, I'm Alex. I work for California State Parks right here in Santa Cruz County. I'm coming at you right now from Castle Rock State Park. And while this is a very impressive rock, this isn't the Castle Rock. I should probably be clear about that right up front. This is one of the Magoo rocks, actually. But it is made out of the same stuff. The Castle Rock itself is just a couple hundred yards that way. Anyway, I'll give you a little kind of perspective of the area we're in right here, because I know this is just a tiny portion of it. But first, just want to introduce myself. So this is going to be a 30-minute program hosted by me, of course. My name is Alex. I work here as an interpretive ranger or interpreter with California State Parks, which just means it's my job to kind of distill the natural and cultural history of our parks for the public, school kids, visitors, random visitors, hikers, day users, campers, that kind of thing. So if you go on a guided walk, you might have an interpreter or an interpretive docent, and that's me. That's me. I'm one of those folks anyway. So I wanted to welcome you here. I know we've got a lot of stuff changing in our lives, all of us right now, and I think that's pretty appropriate for here. Castle Rock, literally, I mean, it's an old saying. You've probably heard it, but it's super true here at Castle Rock State Park. The only constant here is change. Changing all the time. Now, if you're looking for updates about the COVID-19 situation, everything with parks, I'm not going to go into it super in depth right here because there are a lot of resources that I recommend you check out. All of our social media platforms, at least in the Santa Cruz district and should be statewide mostly, are updating as they come. We post right on our Facebook, Instagram, and everything. So if you're following some parks in the area, including this one, you can find information about that. Or on the main California State Parks website, www.parks, with an S, .ca for California, .gov for .gov. So you can check that out. It's changing quite a bit as things do, and so getting those updates up to the minute from our leadership team is going to be the best way to do it. As for now, there's certainly some changes. Campgrounds have been closed, including here in the park. I don't know if you knew, but we do have backpacking campgrounds here in the park. But those car camping campgrounds are closed. For the moment, most of our natural parks, redwood parks, mountain parks, and beaches are open, although there has been some talk about restricting vehicle access because we got a lot of people out at the beach last weekend. So many that we couldn't really practice social distancing and some of those other really necessary practices during this situation. So I'm not going to get any more into that unless you have specific questions you want to shoot at me while you've got my attention, if you're joining us on the live feed. But otherwise, I would highly recommend you check out really any of the park's social media platforms. Most of the parks around here I know have Facebook, Instagram, and our official State Parks website, which again, www.parks.ca.gov. And so you can check that out. So I was wanting to focus a little bit more on the park itself here. Now, you might have noticed my earphones. I've got somebody at home helping me out with questions and things, although having a little problem with service, so I might have to jump behind the camera, the iPad that I'm live streaming you from. So if you have any questions throughout the program, I want you to go ahead and just type into the comments, and I will do my best to get to it as soon as possible. And then the last probably 5 minutes or so, we'll just devote entirely to any questions if we've got people streaming in at home, so which I hope you are. So once again, I want to welcome you to Castle Rock State Park. We're here, I like to call it the gateway of the Santa Cruz Mountains. We're right between Silicon Valley, or the Valley of the Heart's Delight, previously, and Santa Cruz. And so Santa Cruz County and San Lorenzo Valley. And so for a lot of people, this is, the entrance into, it's kind of the barrier between, or it's the start of many backpacking adventures ending all the way down at the coast at Waddell Beach. And so this is a really cool spot, which, not necessarily everybody knows about. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get behind the camera. I'm going to take the camera off of the tripod right now and give you a little perspective of the area we're in right now. Because I know you're only getting a little piece of it. So let's take a look around. Okay. So this is, like I said, one of the Magoo rocks, and so it is a rock formation, or boss, as they call them, that is really, really close, actually, to the Castle Rock, which is where this park gets its name from. Oh, there's my water bottle. But if you were to go beyond my water bottle and that rock behind there and just a couple hundred yards back up the hill in that direction, you'd get to the Castle Rock. I'm not there right now because I saw some climbers over there, and so I didn't want to disturb them or have them disturb our little video conference here. And you can see I'm kind of on the side of the mountain right here. Kind of goes up and it's got the rock formations, and then it continues down all the way, I guess down into San Lorenzo Valley, which is where I'm from. Grew up coming around to parks like this, hiking up here, camping up here. Waterman Gap Trail Camp and Castle Rock Trail Camp, and yeah, so a little dead old tree there. Okay, so this is giving you a little bit of an idea of the surrounding, mostly oak and Doug fir, mixed hardwood. We've got our sandstone rock formation, or bosses. Call these the Magoo rocks. We'll talk a little bit more about them. So this is where we're at right here at Castle Rock State Park in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Okay. So we had an earlier live stream primarily for students. And so if you want to check that out, definitely recommend get into it a little bit deeper. But we're talking about plate tectonics and geology of the region. So the Santa Cruz Mountains are only about 15 million years old. Only. As mountains go, that's not that old. I've heard them described, as teenage mountains, adolescent, mountains. So they're not, super old, as old as the Rockies or the Sierra Nevadas, for instance. So they're younger, and like most teenagers, they're in a constant state of growth. Now the growth was a little more dramatic before. We've gone through some changes over millions and millions of years in the growth of these mountains. Originally, we're talking about all this area being underwater. And generally along, where the Pacific and North American tectonic plates meeting. 15 million years ago, the North American plate was subducting under, right? The two tectonic plates were meeting, and the Pacific plate was subducting under the Pacific plate. That happens kind of in a not really smooth, but in kind of a jerky fashion. Pressure kind of builds up, and then more goes and more, and then it's released. With all of that activity, that is where you get a lot of seismic activity, earthquakes, and uplift. And so you get the mountains starting to form, starting to rise out of essentially the sea floor. And so that goes on for a long time, until about 5 million years or so. And I'm just going to say right now, I'm not like expert geologist or anything. I'm an interpreter, so I'm interpreting. Did my homework, did my studying, but I just want to put that out there. So about 5 million years ago, the Pacific plate stopped subducting under the North American plate, and the two plates actually then began sliding along each other. So it changed from what we call a convergent boundary to a transform boundary. And so the transform boundary, as they slide along it, it causes earthquakes, and the earthquakes cause uplift of the mountains. These are, like I said, still pretty young as these things go. So you can actually still see a lot of evidence of the, how it used to be essentially the sea floor and then the beach for a long time before it continued to rise, and this became more and more an inland area than a coastal area. There's more and less dramatic examples of this throughout the mountains. In sandhills areas, for instance, you can still commonly, find, fossils, marine animal fossils, and teeth, that kind of thing. Here, the most striking, at Castle Rock, the most striking evidence of that is the sandstone formations. If you're unaware, sandstone is, like you would think, the first main ingredient in a sandstone is sand. But perhaps, you might say the key ingredient, the secret ingredient, the special sauce that brings it all together, if you will, is the calcium carbonate in it. And that's similar to limestone, is composed primarily of this. So calcium carbonate is essentially, fossilized little, remains of tiny little, macro life from the ocean, little sea life. It can also be caused by plants and things, but in this case, it is mostly marine life, plants and animals. And so that gets essentially fossilized into calcium carbonate. And then that gets into the rocks, and so that is kind of the cement that holds the rocks together. So otherwise, the sand would just kind of stay sand, right? With that calcium carbonate, it's kind of the glue, the cement that is holding all those granules together. And so that is one of the reasons why these are a little easier, say, for anchoring for rock climbers. We get a lot of rock climbers here, and so anchoring is a little easier in sandstone. But it's also why you're seeing a lot of these little hole formations, and even small caves. So that is what's called tuffoni. Okay, and so why don't I'm going to get behind the camera real quick and do a little zoom in on the tuffoni, so you can kind of get a sense for it. But what you're going to look for a couple things. You're going to be looking for not just the caves, but the little holes too, kind of get a repeating pattern. And as I zoom up into it, you'll notice that the outside looks a little harder, rougher, more traditionally, kind of rocky, whereas the inside is sandier. The reason for that is that we get a lot of rain here at Castle Rock State Park. Here in the redwood forest, the hardwood forest, we're technically a rainforest. We get that much rain. So in the wet months, the rocks get really waterlogged and absorb lots of water. In the hotter months, that kind of gets evaporated, kind of wicks away, and so the calcium carbonate goes with the water, and so it kind of comes up to the surface, and the sand is left on the inside. So you get this constant, wicking of not just the water, but like the harder, rockier parts. And so that's why the outside is going to look a little rougher, the inside is going to look a little softer and sandier. I'll point that out. But all those little holes I'm about to show you, small or big, that is tuffoni. That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to get behind the camera and get a little peek. It says it's live. I'll just keep going then. Okay, so here's a really big example. So these caves can get pretty deep. 20 feet deep, 10 feet tall or so. Not super big. We're not talking about, crazy complex cave systems, but, they can get, good enough to shelter in, hang out a little bit. Let's get another look. Oh, here we go. So we're looking. So there's a lot of moss on the rock, but you'll see those little holes kind of almost look like a repeating pattern. So that is more Tefoni. And then these caves right here, I'm going to get a little up close to the cave so you can see how. Remember I said that the outside of the rock, rougher, that's where the calcium carbonate goes. Over many, many, many years of repeated getting wet, getting dry, getting wet, getting dry. And then the inside is more sandy. And in fact, got sand right there. And so kind of the top smooth, sandy area, a little grainy, kind of even. You can even see it like, look, I'm wearing away the rock. That's I'll stop, but that's essentially the process that the water is doing over millions of years. And so you get those Tefoni, which can be just tiny little holes that almost even look like animals or something, and all the way up to pretty good sized caves. Again, not like spelunking caves or anything, but look, this one's pretty decent. Here, I'll show you. I can climb right into this one. Hey. Anybody on? Can you see it? It's not live. Still not live. Okay. It's weird. It told me it was, but. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's Tefoni. So this is really, you can really see this on all of the major sandstone formations here in the park. So the Castle Rock itself, like I said, it's one of the next bosses, a couple hundred yards away. That one has got a lot of these. In fact, even bigger areas. People try to climb to it to get in there, which I would definitely recommend that if you're doing that, coming here to climb, that you're following all responsible practices. You know what you're doing. You've got all the proper gear. You're not adding in unnecessary anchors, using existing ones, that kind of thing. But that is one of the big uses we do have here at the park. So, excuse me. So the only constant here is change. Now, that is not just the weather. Actually, it was hailing a little bit earlier, just a tiny little bit, but it was hailing earlier. Yesterday when I got here, it was snowing, like just a little bit, for like maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And the temperature today has actually fluctuated quite a bit. When I was doing the 10:30 stream, I didn't have my jacket on. Anyway, so that's indicative, not just microclimates, but of course climate change is a larger picture. Now we're talking, natural climate change, as well as man-made exacerbations to climate change. Excuse me. Natural climate change is definitely important. Dictates a lot of the wildlife we find here at the park. For instance, redwood trees. We do have redwoods here at Castle Rock, although they don't. We're a little too high up to get the really huge ones. We do have redwood trees here. Redwood trees are here grow in a very specific area, just a few hundred miles of coast on our west coast. They used to cover continents. Several they were in Europe and Asia. They got around. But back then this wetter, kind of warmer world, as natural climate change affected the temperature and the humidity, the ideal range for redwoods started shrinking. Whereas most of the world was good for it 100 million years ago, over the eons, shrink until really just this tiny little patch along the coast of California and a little bit of Oregon and Washington. And so natural climate change has definitely been a huge, had a huge effect on the park since the beginning, since prehistory. Of course, man-made exacerbations of climate change are definitely coming into play. We're seeing worse and longer, droughts, storm events, and so that's more and more increasing reality for the nature and wildlife in the park. And then, of course, you've got the people's uses of the park have been changing for thousands of years. Of course, at first, we were in territory of multiple different tribal groups within the Ohlone people. We're actually part of the park falls into a complex, ancient trail network between multiple different tribal groups, especially inland to the coast. These tribes had lots of different, relationships. Trade was a vital one. And so we're along essentially an old Ohlone trading route. Now, this isn't where they normally had villages, mountains, and the redwood forests in particular were really grizzly territory back then. They were pretty aggressive, would attack people. So you don't see a lot of villages. Those tend to be in valleys and along the coast, especially. But the forests and mountains were very important for economically, not just for trade routes, but this is where you go to do a lot of hunting, gathering, and especially acorn harvesting would happen. And here in Castle Rock, we have one of the few stands of black oaks in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So this would have been a very valuable acorn harvesting ground. Acorns were a huge staple. You can make lots of meal bases out of it. So this would have been very important for that. Spiritual purposes, there was deep connection to certain of the rocks, and of course it's a beautiful place. If you've ever been here, I don't have to tell you about the potential for spiritual connection to the landscape here and the beauty here. And so that was part of Ohlone culture as well. But later, during American settlement, you start to see these pioneer types here to harvest the resources more commercially. And so lumber and lime, essentially an early form of cement, those were huge. So you see lots of mills cropping up, flumes even used to transport the logs out, and steam engines to kind of pull the trunks out of canyons. You see there's a shingle mill nearby, lots of tan bark operations. We're stripping tan oak trees of their bark to process for as a tanning agent for leather working. So you see that kind of use in the 19th century. And then, of course, in the 1960s, started to become a park. This is big part of like a later era of real environmental movement here in California, which of course California and even Santa Cruz specifically, it's really always been kind of at the forefront of that environmental movement of conservation and preservation. Big Basin, just down the road, in 1902, started as the first Redwood State Park, and really the first park that would become the modern California State Park system. That was all right here in Santa Cruz. And then even today, we've got efforts like our Crumb Clean efforts. If you've ever been camping, not to leave food out, so that we're not increasing the population of corvids, crows, and blue jays that then in the winter months go and eat the eggs of this incredibly rare bird, the marbled murrelet. And so, we're state parks and different environmental groups here in the area have been kind of leading the way in how agencies can react and help to preserve, especially endangered and vulnerable wildlife in its borders. So that's something that, of course, since 1902 and before, and of course, here in the park since the 1960s when it opened, has been a big part of the use here, and actually a large part of the park here is actually preserved. There's no trails or anything, public access at all. And of course, as use has continued, as the park has developed, the changes have the recreational uses have changed a bit as well. In the 1970s, the Skyline Sea Trail opened, and so this became a very popular kind of alternate starting point for the Skyline Sea instead of starting at Saratoga Gap. Because then you get in all this beauty, the amazing vistas of Goat Rock and just all along Castle Rock Ridge. Travertine Springs. So there's a couple of backpacking camps, trail camps here in the park. Again, they are closed currently, along with all their campgrounds and state parks at the moment, as we're dealing with the current situation. But we have two trail camps here, including the only non-reservation trail camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's pretty cool. It's the only walk-up. You can go. You can fill out a little self-registration slip in the parking lot here, and then hike into the trail camp. So pretty cool. Not too long of a hike either. So you've got backpacking and just people trying to get out, cross the Skyline Sea off the bucket list. Got a lot of rock climbing, as I mentioned. The sandstone boulders here, great. If you need to put in an anchor. Also, there's lots of low rocks, so we get a lot of what people call bouldering. That's when, if you've ever seen anybody just kind of throw a mat down on the ground and you're climbing. You're not climbing that high because you're not climbing with ropes. You've just got that mat on the ground. But it's a good way to kind of practice some of the technical stuff there. So we get a lot of that. And equestrians, we got horse riding in the park. We've got a couple trails that we allow bike riding on as well, a couple of our service roads. And then, of course, we get educational use as well. Right now, we're doing these live streaming, so people can still get a taste of the park, get a little bit of the information. Normally, we offer guided walks on the weekends. We have field trips, school kids coming in from Santa Cruz and San Jose counties and Monterey as well, Santa Clara counties and Monterey as well. And so we get a lot of educational use as well. If you're hoping to use the park, we are still open as of now. We do absolutely encourage you to follow all social distancing and other practical measures, hand sanitizing and washing and everything while you're here. But we are still open. Of course, I'd recommend if you need to just kind of get out and walk, just keep from getting stir crazy. Recommend you first hitting up your local parks and everything. But as of now, we are open, and rangers are patrolling and maintaining all of the normal regulations. So as long as everybody is following that, as well as kind of the new regulations we have in place regarding COVID-19, I would encourage you to come out and enjoy. And if you can't, I hope that this video helped a little bit. Looks like we have been offline, having a little trouble, don't have the best reception up here, so I guess we have not been live for this video, but I'm going to go ahead and post it right now, so I hope you get the chance to check it out and scratch a little bit of your parks fix if you're itching for that a little bit. So thanks everybody. This is Alex signing out from Castle Rock State Park. Bye.